Machine. My name is Arun.
And my name is Patricia.
Hey Patricia, ready to take a blast back to the past?
Yes, let's head over to the Wayback Machine and see what we can find.
Okay, here we go. So Mr. Peabody and Sherman is a 2014 film that was DreamWorks' 28th feature film. It was released in the UK as February the 7th, 2014, France in February 12th, 2014, and in North America, finally North America in March of 7th, which is very confusing release dates given that Peabody and Sherman is actually an American property.
Yeah, so for those who are wondering, what is Mr. Peabody and Sherman? Mr. Peabody and Sherman was part of a collection of cartoon serials that appeared in the Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoon back in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And basically the whole premise of Mr. Peabody and Sherman is that you have a dog named Mr. Peabody and his boy assistant named Sherman, and they go into the Wayback Machine to go back in time to meet up with various historical figures. And they just say a whole bunch of jokes and references that kind of like spoof on the historical place that they're at and showing off Mr. Peabody's intelligence and helping save the day. So essentially that the idea of somebody traveling around in time and interacting with historical figures would be featured in other properties such as Time Squad and even like other films such as like Encino Man, in which you have a character who is from the past and is interacting with the present, and Hysteria to some degree. So there have been concepts that came out after Mr. Peabody and Sherman that had followed that criteria.
Yeah. Have you actually watched the original shorts?
Yes, I have actually. Yeah, back in the early 90s, they actually did feature Rocky and Bullwinkle at Nickelodeon as reruns, and that was how I first got introduced to the series. I saw the Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoons. I saw Mr. Peabody and Sherman, Dudley Do-Right, their Fractured Fairy Tales, Aesop and Son, and many more.
Yeah. I just think in regards to Peabody and Sherman, it's we weren't really introduced to it till probably very, very early on. I guess you could probably say the 90s at that time. And mind you, Rocky and Bullwinkle, I think at that time really didn't take any they didn't really take any prospects, I think, for us until that 90s movie came out. Which obviously the 3D Rocky and Bullwinkle. So and then there was this chance to kind of like be introduced to the other bits of it, and Peabody and Sherman I think was there, but I don't think it was. I don't think it caught on to kind of like justify any like future reruns after that or anything. Like that.
I mean there have been a few adaptations of Jay Ward's other cartoons. As mentioned earlier, there was the Peabody and Sherman. There was a Rocky and Bullwinkle. I meant to say there was the Rocky and Bullwinkle movie. Then there was the Dudley Do-Right movie, and then there was a Boris and Natasha movie that was the one that came out first in the 90s. And a lot of people point out George of the Jungle, but even though that was done by Jay Ward, it wasn't part of the Rocky and Bullwinkle lineup.
No,
so,
George of the Jungle was its own thing, wasn't it? So
yes, it was.
Yeah.
Yes, it was its own thing.
Yeah, and in regards to Peabody and Sherman, I watched some of the clips recently, and so for me, one interesting thing that I noticed about this is that it's done a lot in the style of a radio drama.
That's pretty much what it was. So the history about this was that, Jay Ward was, when he was creating Rocky and Bullwinkle, he styled it very similar to a radio drama that you would listen to in your living room, because at the time that was how, the cornerstone of cartoons like, Warner Brothers and stuff like that. It was kind of like a little different in the 50s. So Rocky and Bullwinkle was done very cheap. It was done in a Mexican animation studio, and they mostly relied on a lot of radio actors to portray these characters. A lot of people that you would probably know of, such as Paul Frees and what you call it, June Foray. They, some of their first voiceover roles were in the Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoon because they worked a lot on radio. And so eventually, the Rocky and Bullwinkle series became very popular. In fact, so much so that if you were to listen to any animation creator around the 80s and 90s, such as Matt Groening or Joe Murray, they would tell you that one of their main influences in making cartoons was based off of Rocky and Bullwinkle, because one of the things about watching the original Rocky and Bullwinkle is that they did a lot of jokes and references to, the Communist Party and trying to make fun of it and spoof on it, and kids wouldn't get it. It's if you ever heard of those cases about you watched something as a kid and then you didn't understand the jokes until you got older, that's where it originally came from.
Well, I mean that was America at the time, wasn't it? I mean, it wasn't just Rocky and Bullwinkle. I mean, I remember watching the original tapes of when the Kennedy assassination news reports, and even then you could tell even Walter Cronkite was even struggling at the time to kind of keep a away a bias that said, oh well, the Soviet Union said they have nothing to do with it. Oh well, we'll take and they kind of gave an innuendo of oh well, we should take them at their word and not, and right. Even at that time it was it wasn't just in it wasn't just in Rocky and Bullwinkle, it was everywhere, man. It was just
right. Yeah, so it was there for the kids, because if you see characters like Boris and Natasha and Fearless Leader, they were essentially trying to spoof off of, the communist rules and political stuff and government stuff. And just mentioned earlier that they had a lot of puns and gags, and that was what, drew in the kids to watch it every week, because Bullwinkle would be flubbing his stuff and he would be messing up, and then Rocky would be the straight man to get everything situated. And each of the Rocky and Bullwinkle seasons had a continuing storyline. You had to tune in every episode to find out what happened next. In the first season, it involved with rocket fuel. In the second season, it involved with stamps. And we continue on, so on and so forth. While the Rocky and Bullwinkle stories were story-driven, the rest of the shorts were very self-contained. So something like Mr. Peabody and Sherman, every single time that you would see an episode of that, they would always be traveling to a new place. And that was pretty much it.
Yeah, so obviously, I mean, that was the introduction to Peabody and Sherman, and heck, we're not even got into the movie yet, which I think... I guess one burning question I think would be interesting. I mean, I don't know, do you think it would be good to start off by asking the question of whether the movie is faithful to the animated shorts in the Rocky and Bullwinkle show?
Sort of, in some senses. If you look at it at the surface, it is the same as the short, but they did change a lot. For whether that it was for good or for bad, that is up for debate. So let's start things off at the beginning. So Peabody is very similar to in the cartoon shorts. He's very smart and sophisticated. He's the world's most intelligent dog, and he seems to be doing a lot of scientific discoveries, and he is apparently world famous. So the thing that they changed here was that instead of Sherman being his assistant that he would always just tag around with, he's his adopted son, or that's actually kind of interesting. I've never heard of that interpretation.
Well, in the original cartoon, he was his adopted son as well. In the
it was in a sense, I guess that you could say that, but they never really play it up,
Well, that's what they established in the first episode of the.
They did, yeah. That is true that they did establish it in the first episode, but it wasn't the main focus.
Yeah.
The main focus was just them traveling around.
Yeah, which I think, in regards to that story arc, if we concentrate on that story arc first, the one thing I'll say about Peabody and Sherman in regards to the story, now, don't get me wrong, I know I've been pretty negative about some of the DreamWorks films that some people actually have liked, and I'm sure there are some people out there who like Peabody and Sherman, and I can understand why, because it has this charming sense to it. It is actually a very fun movie, but, in regards to the story arcs, they're very rickety bridges. I have to say, in regards to in regards to Peabody and Sherman. So Peabody is obviously the father figure of Sherman in this case, and obviously then that gets threatened when Sherman finally goes to school, and which in a way is kind of an evolution. The one thing I will say about this movie is that it is an evolution of the story, by the way. But Sherman finally goes on his own adventure, and he finally goes to school, and he ends up biting a girl there, and we'll go into all that.
This girl was actually added into the movie, and you can definitely tell why, because she clearly does not belong in a Peabody and Sherman cartoon.
Yeah, but before we get into that, obviously, I just want to bring up on the Peabody and Sherman bit, which is that the thread in their arc is that obviously there's this counselor who wants to take Sherman away from Peabody because obviously she thinks that this dog cannot raise this child properly. And so there's that thrown in there as well, but that's kind of like, but then that's one part element that's going to be juggled. Now the Penny, who is obviously in this as well, that she gets juggled around in this as well. She's supposed to be first of all, they don't like each other, a la the Swan Princess, I guess you could say, and then all of a sudden, Peabody throws in the plot device that she's obviously massively opposed to you, and but that means that you're attracted to her more. And so then, obviously, that goes into then that gets that going, which then that's another arc that's kind of juggled around as well. And then there's obviously the time traveling people that we have, with who they go to, like George Washington and Leonardo da Vinci and various other characters that they go into. Queen Victoria appears in a bit as well. Like there's all those people kind of like thrown in there. But here's the thing: like it kind of feels more like the story feels more like a juggling act than actually does feel like a streamline going across. To be fair,
it is based off of a bunch of shorts, and each short was only about like 6 or 7 minutes long, and it was like that in a sense in which they would go from one place to another. They would always travel to different locations, and they would learn about the historical figure. They would say a bunch of jokes. They would save the day, or they would turn things into more of a disaster. I mean, that was kind of the thing. But yeah, the story should have been a little bit more streamlined.
Yeah, but I would argue that this isn't a short. This is a movie. Obviously,
that is true. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. So I mean, if anything, if you are going to make a movie out of Peabody and Sherman, you can't. I mean, you need to have it streamlined for the entire. How long was the movie? About 92 minutes.
Yeah, about 92 minutes.
Yeah, so 92 minutes, and I mean, it feels like it's kind of like being juggled from like what's one focus and another focus, I think, and so whether it's whether Sherman is kind of like evolving away from Peabody, or whether Peabody is trying to keep him more close by to protect him, or whether it's Penny trying to wedge him away, but either for good or for bad reasons. There's a lot of play here in regards to the story, and unfortunately, I think they kind of needed to kind of focus on one element, and they kind of need to kind of like have things latched onto it rather than having like 3 things going at once. If that makes more sense, because you don't know where the focus kind of lies here, and plus of that, also there's all the time traveling craziness currently going on as well. So it's
I guess that is true. So we essentially have like 3 different plot points. Mr. Peabody trying to keep Sherman as his son, Penny and Sherman trying to have like a relationship, and the third one, which is originally part of the shorts, in which they would travel from place to place and they would meet up with historical figures. Yeah. So I mean, it is true that it does get a little bit jumbled up, and there's just like bits and pieces of it. I think that's the one thing that I probably would have removed if I had to choose it, was remove that whole subplot about Mr. Peabody trying to keep Sherman, because, I mean, to be quite honest, they never addressed that in the show. And also, the whole character of Penny was definitely not necessary. Just the dynamic duo of Peabody and Sherman was just enough.
Yeah, well, I mean, in regards to Penny, she could have been there to kind of like say, I mean, one thing they should have done is that, and I think they did, to be fair, they did establish this like at the beginning of the movie, Peabody and Sherman are this team, and these are the adventures they go through, and they did establish that with the whole Marie Antoinette thing with before the bit before they ended up getting captured by the revolutionaries. But so they established all that at the beginning of the movie, which was good. But then obviously you add in Penny, which is going to be kind of like the thing that's going to throw them off cancer. If that makes sense. So you kind of bring her in to kind of like say, oh well, what happened if she been brought in to kind of like rock the boat a little bit. And I agree with you. That probably should have been. I actually disagree with you on that. I think she should have been in there to kind of like be that rocking the boat, kind of like within the plot. It's just unfortunate that it comes in between Sherman having this crisis of having to keep hold of Sherman. Peabody having to keep hold of Sherman to with this whole custody kind of situation, if you will. So yeah, it's so I actually like Penny in this. I think, and I know it might sound a bit strange to some people, but I think she was a necessary evil. I think in this movie, in regards to all of that. And it's just unfortunately that she's kind of put in there, but she's not given as much. I don't think she's given enough time to develop. I don't think, and that's because of everything else that plays out in this film.
Yeah, it's true, and they wouldn't even include. I don't think they even included Penny as in the character in the Peabody and Sherman show that they added in on Netflix, which of course they did. Of course they would have a DreamWorks movie that they would have an animated series put on Netflix. I mean, it's second nature at this point. So yeah. So I think that, Penny was just included in the movie, and in my opinion, I think was just unnecessary.
Yeah. The whole dog insult in this movie, I don't like, to be
I don't like it either. I mean, come on. This is stupid. Mr. Peabody is a very well-known genius. It's established in the show that every time that, that he would travel around to different locations, sure, there would be like, taken back at first. It's like, oh, wow, a talking dog with glasses. But then when he talks so eloquently and so sophisticated and articulate, then they're like, oh, yeah, he knows his stuff. He knows what he's talking about. Sure. Yeah. So the whole thing about like, oh, he's a dog, he can't adopt a boy. It's like that's a conflict it's like I didn't like it.
Oh, sure. I mean, would you say that maybe the movie should have been about that? Like, Peabody gaining the trust of the government. Maybe that in itself could have been a movie. Maybe. Maybe like a prequel series. I can see that, maybe with maybe Mr. Peabody first finding Sherman and deciding to adopt him as his assistant, and then then they're like, oh no, you can't do that, and then Mr. Peabody points out points out the reasons why he would be a good father, and maybe they would invent the Wayback Machine and showing that he's teaching Sherman about the ways of history. Then I can probably see that as like a prequel, but not as like something that's already been established. Like the Wayback Machine is already there. Mr. Peabody and Sherman have already been through a few adventures. So I think that that struggle, I mean, if they are going to do that, they should have made it a little bit longer. Yeah. In regards to the first act, I mean, it's a good setup. At least I can say about that. But unfortunately, it's setting up, obviously what's going to happen in the second and third act, which I think, unfortunately, I would have done rather differently. I think if I had the choice. So I mean, in regards to how it all, I mean, there's one bit in it where I pick fault with, which is when finally you bring Peabody and Sherman to their breaking point, and Peabody basically calls Sherman a bad boy. And then that whole thing kicks off, and then we get the scene where he's abandoned they crash the Wayback Machine. He's abandoned the Wayback Machine, and he ends up with basically with these in the Trojan horse. And I don't know, I think in that, I think there should have been. I wouldn't have played it like that. I would have put in some far more conflict between Peabody and Sherman. I think it was done too light. In my opinion,
definitely.
After such a, keep in mind, Peabody has built himself, with Sherman to be this person that he can trust and this person who will look after him no matter what. And yet, it's when that is shattered, for the first time, and then there's that big test between the two of them, and I don't know, Sherman seems to be far too forgiving. I think in that, and I would rather have had it where I would have taken out that whole scene, obviously with the whole Trojan thing aside, and I would have had it with the two of them and working things out. I would have liked to have seen a scene where it would have been, you got Peabody and you got Sherman, and Sherman's looking out towards the ocean or whatever, and you've got Peabody goes up and says, hey, basically being apologetic, saying, hey, I'm sorry about what happened, and then obviously Peabody and Sherman challenging Peabody on basically his fatherhood skills. Like, so basically saying, like, why, Mr. Peabody, why can't I call you Dad? And then Peabody explains, oh, well, because I feel that it's not a concept that I feel with. It's like, well, what about my feelings? Wouldn't that have been a far more gripping, topic to kind of like be in the movie rather than what we got?
Yeah, I mean, this is a reason why in the original shorts they didn't have a father-son relationship. It was more like a professor and assistant relationship that Sherman would learn a lot about what Mr. Peabody was showing him whenever they went back to the past.
Yeah, which they should have taken advantage of. And basically said, I'm supposed to be your adoptive son. Like, you're supposed to be raising me as a son. Why are you treating me like an assistant?
Yeah, and that's how Mr. Peabody
concept.
is. Mr. Peabody does not see Sherman as anything more than just an assistant. And that's how it is in the original shorts, is that he is the intelligent dog and Sherman is just his assistant, and he just follows him around. He does exactly what he says, and that's pretty much it. That was like the focus of it. And if they wanted to expand that, I felt like the conflict should have been a lot more stronger. Like, if we wanted to go into the scene in which when Mr. Peabody was being threatened to have Sherman taken away to a human family or something, then he should have shown a lot more emotion to saying, even though I treat you as an assistant, I really love you, Sherman. I see you as like my son. And I think that for the most part, it just, I mean, they do play off that character just like if he was in the shorts. But if they really wanted to go for this angle of, Sherman's life being at risk of being taken away by the only guardian that he ever knows, I think that they should have made Mr. Peabody a lot more sympathetic.
Yeah.
And also,
I don't know. Like, I think in regards to being sympathetic, I think unfortunately, I think if they did that, I mean, there's another complaint. We'll get into the characters in a minute, but I just want to focus up on the story. So, at the end of all that, Peabody supposedly gets killed. It again, without the scene that I just described before, which they probably should have had, the whole Peabody supposedly dying moment doesn't really hold that much water in regards to how much you feel. I mean, like, you have Sherman tearing up and everything, and basically saying, Mr. Peabody, Dad, like, that should have been far more gripping, but it didn't, because I feel like a scene was absent. I feel in that I don't think it was as shocking, I think, as it should have been. Like, Mr. Peabody dying, like, one of the main characters of the movie. That should, and then Sherman going off to into the Wayback Machine to say, oh, hey, we can fix this. There's another Peabody we can go to in another timeline, and we can go fix this.
Yeah, maybe it would have been like Chrono Trigger in a sense, in which, like, oh, in the main story, Chrono dies. We need to go back in time so that we can be able to purchase this Chrono doll from the fair, and then we can be able to replace that, with when the villain attacks Chrono, and then we save Chrono's life. So I think it would have been awesome if Mr. Peabody did die, and then Sherman and Penny decide to go back to the Wayback Machine and either warn Mr. Peabody about what was going to happen, or they would have saved his life just before he gets killed.
Yeah. So they also go into the Wayback Machine, and they go into they obviously cross time paths, and that breaks the space-time continuum, and so obviously this massive vortex opens up, and this massive portal in the sky, which is wasn't that kind of a thing at a time of movies, like there'd be a giant portal in the sky, kind of like a la Ghostbusters. Every movie seems to do that at that point. That was like the big, massive threat to the world at that time, like just a big, massive portal in the sky. Mm-hmm. And so, unfortunately, Peabody and Sherman also does that too, and which you can kind of say makes somewhat sense in this world, because obviously that's what they used to kind of like go back and forth in time. And everything. Mind you, there was a bit when they try and fix it, and they missed a kind of a thing here. Do you notice that they had like a speedometer, and it was going at miles per hour, and it went to like 100 like 200 miles an hour. They missed a really good They missed a really good chance to make a reference there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 88 miles an hour, and you're gonna see some serious shit. Unfortunately,
right. I don't think they would have said the shit part.
Oh, yeah, they wouldn't have said the shit part, but unfortunately, we didn't get 88 miles an hour, and unfortunately, we didn't see that shit, so That's,
Yeah, I mean, it would have been nice if maybe like Mr. Peabody was said, "Oh my, Sherman, we are going 88 miles per hour. We're about to see some serious stuff. Please hold on," or something. Like it would have
yeah,
been nice if we would have gotten a reference.
yeah, it would be nice to get a reference to that. So they go into so obviously all the before all that happened, obviously all the historical figures came back, or the historical dudes if you're a if you're a Bill and Ted fan. But by the way, Bill and Ted's coming back soon. By the way, but
Yeah, I know.
yeah.
That should be interesting.
Yeah, but they have this thing where the council is going to take Sherman away, and but before all that happens, obviously all the craziness of time travel and the portal opening over and all the stuff from back in the past all kind of coming into the present. And then so they come up with the idea of what if we traveled a couple of seconds into the future and to upset the time balance, which, again, I don't know. In sci-fi, I really don't understand the space-time continuum plot device all that well, so if someone out there is more sci-fi than both me and Patricia, I would like to hear what the space-time continuum in fantasy is supposed to actually be, and whether you're traveling a couple of seconds into the future actually recovers that balance or not. I don't know. Any Doctor Who fans in the house?
That would be awesome. I would love to know that.
Yeah, I would love to know that too. So please leave it in the comment section below. But so we get to that point, and so Peabody and Sherman go into the portal, and it closes up on them. And again, like they come out of it. We all know they were going to come out alive. But I don't know. Like, would you have Iron Giant that shit?
I don't know.
To be honest, I think I probably would have. Like, they go into the portal, it closes up, and then, they never... Well, I mean, at that point, they think they're never seen again, and they play that out for a little bit. And then, so, it's like, oh, the whole world's in mourning because Mr. Peabody's finally gone, and he sacrificed himself to save the world. That would be, like, the ultimate sacrifice, if you will, with Sherman. And like, they have this whole thing. They play this whole thing out and everything. And then at the end, I would have had it where a couple of years into the future, where Penny's all grown up and she still looks at the building that's at the top and wonders about that day. And then all of a sudden, the portal just opens up again and they come flying out. And and then it's like, so at least you have like a I know it's kind of like a kind of cop out ending still, but
it almost kind of like reminds me of like with the ending of the original Back to the Future, in which when Doc Brown comes in with the DeLorean and then he invites Jennifer and Marty to they say we're gonna go to the future, and then he's like, oh, don't we need some roads? It's like, where we're going, we don't need roads. So it's kind of like it was like a cliffhanger at the time. It's like, oh, they're going to go to the future now. But then we wouldn't know until later on that they would just actually have a sequel. But unfortunately, this movie actually, I mean, even though it did make its money back, it underperformed, and it was considered to be a box office failure.
Before we get into that, I mean, let's get into the characters first. I mean, so your thoughts on Peabody and Sherman?
Okay, as I mentioned before, the elements of Peabody and Sherman are still there, and they were tweaked, but in some ways, I felt that they were tweaked in the wrong way.
Yeah. For me, Mr. Peabody feels a bit Mary Sue-ish. I'll be honest with you. The fact that they kind of play him out as like someone who can't do no wrong, and don't get me wrong, he does have his flaws. Like, again, treating Sherman kind of... There were some times where he treated Sherman pretty shitty. I mean, to be honest with you, he was an arsehole sometimes. I will get that. But then there's there's times where he looks so invincible. And I don't know, that kind of turned me off a little bit of him.
To be fair, that's kind of how he was in the original as well. That he was like the most smartest character in the entire short. Like nobody else could compare to him. So they were following what the shorts were. But then again, this was the 50s and 60s. So character development like that just wasn't like a common thing back then. In which they had to have like one particular character trait. And with Mr. Peabody's case, it was like he was the smartest one. So he was the one that he was the one who told the advice. He was the one who came up with the plans. He was the one who said, we're going to go to this place and this place. And we're going to talk to this person. We're going to help him out with this thing. So yeah, he was a character essentially with no flaws. I mean, sure, he would have like a situation where he would have to solve things, but that was more like an obstacle than just like a huge conflict.
Yeah, but I mean, I would have had it where, I mean, I probably would have played, I mean, again, we're playing to a modern audience here. I would have kind of played this the same way as like, you play Fantastic Mr. Fox. Like, yeah, he's kind of knows theoretically everything that's currently going on, but then, that's theoretical, like, but then the practicalities don't really work in his favor. Like, I would have had that kind of, like, happen once or twice.
Sure. I mean, I guess you could say that Mr. Peabody's character would have worked in the 50s and 60s, but yeah, in this day and age, yeah, his character needed to be a lot more fleshed out with more flaws and, not to be so perfect,
Yeah, and Sherman, I mean, he's a child. I mean, like he is. I mean, he's child to the sea. And and he plays that very well. And actually, a shout out to Max Charles, by the way, because I think he did a very good job.
So essentially, once again, he played it off very similar to how he played it off in the original shorts, in which Mr. Peabody would tell Sherman about some sort of fact, and this historical figure did this thing, and we're in this time period, and he would just stand there and listen and ask a bunch of questions, and he would just do what Mr. Peabody did. So yeah, he essentially played as Sherman to the T.
Yeah, and I just think it's just a shame. Also, Penny Peterson, played by April Winter, and I think she was adorable. I
didn't like her. I'm sorry, I did not.
I tell you, I actually do ship Penny and Sherman. I think
I did not. How could what? I think this is like one of the few times in which we could actually disagree. I thought she was annoying. I thought that she was too mean to Sherman. That to the point in which how could they actually get along? I mean, I could see like toward the end, yes, but
yeah. Don't get me wrong. In the first act, I didn't like her, but within the second and third act, I kind of when you saw her edge, like you kind of there was a bit of a likableness to her. I think, and I would have had it played like they would have been like intellectual rivals, kind of like not like Mandoc and Dexter. I kind of would have seen them more like they would have been like
and Jimmy from Jimmy Neutron.
There would be this essence of respect from amongst one another. They would have been kind of like they would have been frenemies. Like they would have been like a Shantae and like that pirate girl. You also forgive me. I don't know so much about Shantae.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I think that if she was a lot less sassy and mean and more intellectual to what was going on, then yeah, I could see that. But no, I just didn't care for her. She just clearly didn't fit in a Mr. Peabody and Sherman scenario.
Yeah, I do agree. Like when I was looking at the first time, it's like am I watching the animated version of Mean Girls here? Like it's just this. I mean, come on, guys. Like this is not what this is supposed to be. But So at the beginning, I didn't like her, but I grew to like her in the second and third act.
Okay, that's fair. I just didn't really care for her.
Yeah, and but mind you, like I would have liked to have seen more conflict between her and Mr. Peabody, because in a way she's like one of the devices that's kind of like plying Sherman away from Mr. Peabody. So you would have thought that's
essentially that, because she's a human, and they were around the second and third act they were starting to get along, and Mr. Peabody kind of felt threatened that she's going over to this girl. No, Mr. Peabody thinking that Sherman belongs to me. I'm his he's my assistant. I'm going to try to make him stay away from her. And I guess if Penny would have been like something related to the judge, maybe if she would have been like the judge's daughter or something, or maybe like in some relations to like the court deal, the court case, like maybe in a way to kind of like pull the stories together in which like Penny was related to in some way. Like I think that maybe it could have worked out a little bit better. But,
yeah, and I would have liked to have seen I agree with all of that. Actually, I would like to have seen that.
Yeah, but I think that because I mean, and you're right that throughout the movie, Mr. Peabody was acting really mean to Sherman, which is not how he acted in the cartoon. In the cartoon, he would answer Sherman's questions, he would teach him about all these things, and he would never act like an asshole to him. He would just, I mean, I know he never really acted like a like a father to son, because again, they never really too much implied the whole relationship like that, with only the exception of the first episode. But yeah, I mean, if there was like assistance, like maybe let's just say that Sherman didn't have any friends, and maybe his parents aren't always around, and he goes to Mr. Peabody so that he can be able to learn more about history. And maybe we could have had that kind of relationship like that, in the sense that maybe the reason why they try to make him stay away is because he's too close to a dog as opposed to normal humans. And then maybe they decided, hey, let's try to add Penny to it to kind of like draw Mr. Peabody away from them. So I think maybe that would have worked out better.
Yeah. So, I just think that's pretty much.
Stephen
Colbert. I forgot to mention actually, Stephen Colbert plays Paul Peterson, Penny's father in this.
And Stephen Colbert also played the president in Monsters vs. Aliens.
Yeah, I just thought it's mind you, it was kind of funny when he it didn't occur to me that it was Stephen Colbert at the very beginning of his performance, but then as we finally got to the chiropractor scheme, he's like, oh yeah, there he is.
Mm-hmm.
It took a while there to kind of to get to that, but besides that, I mean, most of the other people who are in this movie, weren't really all that noteworthy. Really, they were just kind of
they weren't. I mean, to be quite honest, very similar to the show. Whenever they would introduce like a historical figure like George Washington or something like that, they never really they did tell about interesting historical facts, but it was mostly played off as a comedy. And maybe for some people like kids who would watch the original shorts today, they'll be like, oh, this isn't funny. I don't get the jokes. Yeah, that's Jay Ward is very known for his very dry, witty humor. Like it's the kind of it's sort of like if you were watching a British cartoon in a sense, in which it's not supposed to make you like laugh out loud funny, but it's supposed to make you like think about what the jokes are, and you kind of chuckle at it because you get the reference. And I guess they try to play it off here in a sense with a little bit of more wacky shenanigans to make it more appealing to the modern kids. And it just doesn't work. Patrick Warburton is there and, he's like always funny. And then you have this one plot point in which the king sees Penny and he wants to marry her and they have to save her. And yeah, I mean, the playoffs of, going back in time and, going over to locations and they meet up with that. I mean, that is more or less how they are in the show. But yeah, it's just not as funny. I think it should have been a lot more humorous. And also, the one thing I do want to give credit for is that they were able to modernize and update the Wayback Machine, and it looks really nice. Because the original Wayback Machine was just like a regular time machine and just go in and out, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, it would have been nice to have an explanation for the modernization of the time machine, because it would have been remember, it would be nice to if they had some banter between Peabody and Sherman, where they were saying, oh, remember that old device we used to use, which is made out of pipes and things, and here we are with this new modern Wayback Machine, Wayback Machine 2.0.
I think it would have been nice. I think it would have been really nice.
Yeah, that would have been fun.
Yeah, it would have been really cool. And, when many people hear about the term Wayback Machine, they don't think of Peabody and Sherman. There's actually a website called the Wayback Machine. If you want to go back to a website that is over, 15 or 20 years old and it doesn't work anymore and you want to see what it looked like before it shut down, then you can go to the Wayback Machine website, put in the URL link, and you can take a look to see what was there before. So I think more people know about.
Do you think that was inspired by the Wayback Machine in Peabody and Sherman? Do you think?
I think that's where they got the name from. They definitely got the name from Peabody and Sherman. And instead of going back in time, to see historical figures, they just use it so that if there's a website that you liked back in a particular time period, but it doesn't work anymore, then you can just go into that link and you can see it. So I think that's where they got the name from. So I think they were inspired by Peabody and Sherman when doing that website.
Mm-hmm. So, that was Peabody and Sherman. And
so once again, as mentioned in other episodes of Dream Machine, this also got an animated series on Netflix. And it was, I think it was for 2 or 3 seasons right before it stopped. And I haven't seen it, so don't question me on that. And I don't know if it's actually funny that we are talking about this because they did the Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoon last year on Amazon, and I'm actually curious about if this is kind of their way of trying to reintroduce these characters for a new generation. Because, around the 90s, we actually did get introduced to Rocky and Bullwinkle with the reruns on Nickelodeon. And then we had the Boris and Natasha movie, the Rocky and Bullwinkle movie, and Dudley Do-Right. And now we have the, for the younger kids, now they have the Peabody and Sherman cartoon and the Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoon. And to be quite honest, if you took a look at Fractured Fairy Tales, in which essentially it's about fairy tales that are made as jokes, I think that, without Fractured Fairy Tales, we wouldn't get Shrek. So I think that Rocky and Bullwinkle has become more influential to animation than most people give credit for.
Mm-hmm. So, do you think it's going to be? You think we're going to call these characters? I mean, do you think it's going to be a? I do apologize. What's the name of the guy who created the show? Jay Ward. Sorry.
Jay Ward.
Yeah. Do you think it's going to be like a Jay Ward cinematic universe? And that's it.
It's actually funny that you mentioned that because they have never collaborated at all. Rocky and Bullwinkle within their characters, and Peabody and Sherman within their characters, the Fractured Fairy Tale characters, and Dudley Do Right were in their characters. So they never interacted at all. And it would be really interesting if there was a huge cinematic universe. Like maybe Rocky and Bullwinkle would be fighting against Boris and Natasha and Fearless Leader, and then they go back in time, and then they meet up with Peabody and Sherman, and then they get Dudley Do Right, and then maybe they meet up with George of the Jungle for some reason, even though those shows didn't interact at all. So, that would be really, really interesting. I would like to see that.
Yeah, cool. Well, I think that's it for the Peabody and Sherman. By the way, people have been listening to this show quite religiously. I think we're nearly up to what number are we up to now? We're up to number 29 now.
Yeah, I think we're up to number 29. Yeah, you're right.
Tell you what, I think we'll give everyone a bonus, shall we?
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah. Tell you what, I'm going to answer a question from someone who messaged me on Twitter, and so this is from Lloyd Dummer. I don't think that's his real name. I think he's just a fan of Dumb and Dumber. But anyway, I'll answer it. Arun and Patricia really love the DreamWorks podcast series. I would like to ask, if you had to make an adventure film picking 5 DreamWorks animation movie characters, which 5 would you pick?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Yeah. I guess I'd probably go with... Shrek has to be one. Because
yes.
He's like... He is, like... He will be the draw for an Avengers, DreamWorks movie, so he would be the first. Poe, I think, would be the second. I think we go with Poe. Just to be funny, I think I'll bring in Moses. I think
Moses.
What? He's got the powers of God. He made that team pretty unbeatable, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, I guess that is true. But him interacting with Shrek, that would be really weird.
Oh my goodness, that would be hilarious. And
that is like a fever dream fanfic right there.
Yeah. And I think for the 4th, I probably might cheat a little bit here. I might bring in Peabody and Sherman. Obviously, purely because they can time travel.
Yeah, and I guess it would make sense because then they would interact with Moses if they traveled back in time.
Yeah. And also, I might cheat again, actually. I hope you don't mind. I will bring in Hiccup and the dragon.
Again, that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah. And so, and I was teetering on potentially either bringing in even though I don't really, even though one was quite a surprise to me, even though I don't really like it all that much, I would have brought in maybe Turbo, or maybe as like a substitute, I bring in Captain Underpants, just for the superhero silliness.
Sure.
Maybe. So, what would your 5 be?
Oh man. Okay, so yeah, Shrek and Poe and Hiccup would definitely. I probably bring them in. Let's see. I think that if I want to bring in a character, I would bring in Susan from Monsters vs. Aliens.
Okay. Yeah, but she's already kind of part of a superhero team already. So
yeah,
would you dream the DreamWorks Avengers?
Yeah, sure. We need our Black Widow.
Okay.
And another character that I would probably bring in is one of the characters from Rise of the Guardians, because they are part of a superhero team anyway.
Yeah. So I probably.
So maybe I'm thinking maybe either like Santa or Jack Frost or the Easter Bunny.
Mm-hmm. So will be interesting if they did like an Infinity War. Obviously I'd bring in all of them. So
yeah. Who would be the main villain, by the way?
Ooh. Is it who's
I want Shang Long.
Shang Long. Yeah, I could see that. I think. Dare I say maybe the Fairy of Your Godmother could come back.
Oh yeah. That could be a good one too. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of other villains. Maybe Titan can come back from Megamind. Maybe.
No. The Were-Rabbit.
The Were-Rabbit from that'd be kind of weird.
Wallace and Gromit.
Well, that's Wallace anyway. So. If anything,
yeah,
I'd make him one of the Avengers and just have that be his power. Like he keeps turning into the Were-Rabbit every time he gets angry. He'd be kind of like that Hulk.
Okay.
Maybe. I don't know. And maybe Ramesses could potentially be. Yeah.
Or Mrs. Tweety.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be fun. So Ramesses come back in the Wayback Machine. and Peabody and Sherman can't stop him, so they have to get in Shrek and all the other people. So maybe that's the way that brings them all together. Maybe there is like a massive disruption in the space-time continuum, and instead of like going in through time now, it just goes through other dimensions and other worlds and brings in all these characters. And that would be. I tell you what,
and it would be nice if we can get Puss in there because he is the ogre destroyer. So it would be nice if maybe he could just like slash his sword and kill some dudes.
Yeah, he'd be good in like you see him like in the major fight scenes, like all the characters together is the big massive final battle, and like you just see like all fighting, and like there's Puss in Boots like fighting what's her name from Sinbad, and maybe not her from Sinbad, and maybe like Cortez from like the Road to El Dorado, and everybody, just everyone who can like throw a swing around a sword. Oh, and all that jazz.
Yeah,
so,
I can't think of anybody else at the moment.
Yeah, but hey, DreamWorks, there's your next money spinner. So,
yay! Yeah, exactly. If you want to catch in on the cinematic universe, I mean, especially since you're with Universal now, and they failed so hard with their monster mashup. So, hey, DreamWorks, let's see it happen.
Yeah. Write all checks to the Arun Meta Show and Old School Lane, and and we'll happily accept them. So,
yeah, definitely. and we want to have at least a 10% cut for every ticket that you sell.
Yeah, and also some cut in the merchandise too.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Cool. So, thanks for that question. And so from me, Arun.
And Patricia.
Take care, and bye for now.
See you later. See you later. See you later. See you later.